Josephine Blackwood pressed her back against the rough bark of a cottonwood tree, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she watched the dust settle on the trail behind her. The late afternoon sun of 1878 New Mexico territory cast long shadows across the unforgiving landscape, but none felt darker than the shadow her father had cast when he'd thrown her from their homestead with nothing but the clothes on her back and her mother's locket around her neck. Disgrace to the Blackwood name, he had bellowed, his face purpling with rage. No daughter of mine consorts with that cattle rustler's boy. The accusation against Thomas had been false, she knew it in her heart, but her father had never been one to listen to reason once his mind was set, especially not after the drought had withered their crops and soured his temperament further. Josephine swiped at her tears with a dusty sleeve. At 20 years old, she had never been farther than the nearest town. Now she had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. Her younger sisters had watched from the windows, faces pale with shock, while her mother had turned away, too cowed by her husband's fury to intervene. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made Josephine shrink further against the tree. She wasn't ready to face anyone, certainly not her father if he'd come to ensure she was truly gone from their land. Instead, a tall man on a chestnut stallion rode into view. His broad-brimmed hat shaded his face, but she could see the sun-weathered skin and the strong set of his jaw. He pulled his horse to a stop and tilted his head, studying her with clear blue eyes. "Miss, you all right?" His voice was deep, touched with concern. Josephine straightened, trying to salvage what dignity remained. "I'm fine, sir." The stranger's gaze took in her tear-streaked face, the small bundle of possessions clutched to her chest, and the obvious lie in her words. He dismounted in one fluid motion, keeping a respectful distance. "Name's Matthew Walsh," he said, removing his hat. "I don't mean to pry, but a young lady alone on this trail isn't something I can ride past without offering assistance." Josephine hesitated. Her father had warned her about strangers, especially men with kind eyes that might hide dangerous intentions. But what choice did she have? "I'm Josephine Blackwood," she finally replied. "And I have nowhere to go." Matthew studied her for a long moment, then glanced at the setting sun. "Night's coming. My ranch is about an hour's ride from here. I can offer you a safe place to stay until you figure things out." Josephine felt a flutter of fear. "I couldn't impose. It's not an imposition," Matthew interrupted gently. "Mrs. Rivera, my housekeeper, lives on the property with her husband. You'd be perfectly proper under her watchful eye." The mention of the housekeeper eased Josephine's concern somewhat. She looked down the empty trail stretching in both directions. No other options presented themselves. "Thank you, Mr. Walsh," she said at last. "I accept your kindness." Matthew nodded, his expression solemn. "Let me help you up." His strong hands were calloused but gentle as he lifted her onto his horse, then mounted behind her. Josephine sat rigidly, conscious of his chest against her back, his arms on either side of her as he took the reins. "Relax, Miss Blackwood," he said, his breath warm against her ear. "I promise you're safe." As they rode toward Matthew's ranch, Josephine found herself telling him about her father's unreasonable anger, about Thomas's false accusation, about being cast out with nothing. "My father always had a temper," she explained. "But since Ma got sick last winter and the drought killed half our crops, he's been looking for someone to blame. When he heard rumors about Thomas stealing cattle." She swallowed hard. "Thomas was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. He's not a rustler." Matthew listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "People do desperate things in desperate times," he finally said. "But casting out your own blood isn't something I can understand." The sun had dipped below the horizon by the time they crested a hill, revealing a sprawling ranch below. A main house stood proudly against the darkening sky, with a large barn and several outbuildings nearby. Lamplight glowed from the windows, and smoke curled from the chimney. "Welcome to the Double W," Matthew said. "It's not much, but it's home." Josephine stared at the property with wide eyes. "Not much? It's the largest ranch I've ever seen." Matthew's chuckle rumbled against her back. "Been in my family for 20 years. My pa built it up from nothing, and I've been adding to it since he passed 5 years ago." As they approached the house, a short, sturdy woman emerged onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Her dark hair was streaked with silver, and her eyes narrowed at the sight of Josephine. "Mr. Walsh," she called. "I wasn't expecting company for supper." Matthew dismounted and helped Josephine down. "Mrs. Rivera, this is Miss Blackwood. She needs a place to stay for a while." The housekeeper's sharp eyes softened slightly as she took in Josephine's disheveled appearance. "Well, come in then. Supper's nearly ready, and you look like you could use a hot meal." The warmth of the house enveloped Josephine as she stepped inside. The main room was spacious yet cozy, with a large stone fireplace and comfortable furnishings. The smell of fresh bread and stew made her stomach growl embarrassingly loud. Mrs. Rivera clicked her tongue. "When did you last eat, child?" "Breakfast," Josephine admitted. "This morning." Sit," the housekeeper instructed, guiding her to a chair at the dining table. "Mr. Rivera," she called. "Set another place." A lean, weathered man appeared from a side room, nodded politely to Josephine, and went about laying out another setting without comment. Over a hearty meal of venison stew, fresh bread, and preserved peaches, Matthew explained Josephine's situation in general terms, sparing her the humiliation of details. "She'll stay in the guest room," he concluded, "for as long as necessary." Mrs. Rivera nodded. "I'll make up the bed with fresh linens." "Thank you," Josephine said, struggling to keep her voice steady. "I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness." Matthew shook his head. "No need for repayment. It's what neighbors do." "We're hardly neighbors," Josephine pointed out. "You don't even know me." A small smile tugged at Matthew's lips. "I know enough. You've got honest eyes, Miss Blackwood." That night, lying in a comfortable bed in a clean nightgown borrowed from Mrs. Rivera, Josephine stared at the ceiling and wondered what tomorrow would bring. For the first time since her father's explosive rage, she felt safe. It was a curious feeling to find such security with a stranger. The following morning, Josephine woke to the smells of coffee and bacon. She dressed quickly in her own clothes, which Mrs. Rivera had washed and pressed overnight, and made her way to the kitchen. "Good morning," Matthew greeted her, looking up from his coffee. "Sleep well?" "Better than I expected," Josephine admitted, accepting a cup of coffee from Mrs. Rivera. "Thank you again for your hospitality." Matthew nodded. "I have to ride out to check on the herd today. Mrs. Rivera will show you around the place." After breakfast, the housekeeper gave Josephine a tour of the main house and outbuildings. The ranch was impressive, far larger than her family's modest homestead. Cattle grazed on rolling pastures, cowboys moved about their tasks, and everything ran with an efficiency that spoke of Matthew's capable management. "He built most of this himself," Mrs. Rivera explained as they walked. "After his father died, Mr. Walsh expanded everything. Works from sunup to sundown most days." "No wife to share the burden?" Josephine asked, then blushed at her boldness. Mrs. Rivera's lips twitched. "No, though not for lack of interest from the local ladies. He says he's waiting for the right woman." She gave Josephine a meaningful look that made her blush deepen. Over the next few days, Josephine found herself settling into life at the Double W. She helped Mrs. Rivera with household tasks, grateful for the chance to earn her keep. Matthew was often absent during daylight hours, tending to ranch business, but in the evenings, they would sit by the fire and talk. She learned that he was 28, had been running the ranch alone since his father's death, and had a younger brother studying law back east. He listened intently when she spoke of her dreams of someday teaching school, of her love of books, of her worry for her younger sisters under their father's harsh rule. A week passed, then two. Josephine knew she couldn't stay forever, but whenever she mentioned moving on, Matthew found reasons for her to stay a bit longer. "The stagecoach doesn't come through until next week," he'd say, or "there's a storm brewing. Better wait it out here." On a warm afternoon in early June, Josephine was hanging laundry when she heard raised voices from the direction of the main house. Curious, she made her way closer, freezing when she recognized one of the voices. "Where is she, Walsh? I know you're hiding her." Her father's angry tone carried clearly across the yard. Josephine crept to the corner of the house, peering around to see Matthew standing on the porch, arms crossed, blocking her father's path to the door. "Mr. Blackwood," Matthew said calmly, "I'm not hiding anyone. Your daughter is a guest at my ranch, here of her own free will." Her father's face was flushed with anger. "She's coming home where she belongs. She's got responsibilities, chores that need doing." "Seems to me," Matthew replied, his voice still even but with an edge of steel, "that you relinquished any claim on her when you threw her out with nothing but the clothes on her back. That's family business," her father spat. "None of your concern." "It became my concern when I found her alone on the trail, terrified and without resources." Matthew uncrossed his arms, his stance subtly shifting. "Miss Blackwood is welcome here for as long as she chooses to stay." Her father took a threatening step forward. "You think I don't know what you're after? Pretty young girl, alone on your property? The whole territory will hear about this." Josephine couldn't bear it any longer. She stepped into view. "That's enough, Pa." Both men turned to look at her. Her father's face darkened further, while Matthew's expression showed concern. "You don't need to do this," Matthew told her quietly. "Yes, I do." Josephine moved to stand beside him on the porch, facing her father. "I'm not coming home, Pennsylvania. Not after what you did." "Ungrateful girl," her father growled. "Your mother's beside herself with worry." "Is she?" Josephine asked, doubt clear in her voice. "Or is she just dealing with more of your temper because I'm not there to share the burden?" Her father's hand twitched at his side, and Matthew subtly shifted to place himself slightly in front of Josephine. "Mr. Blackwood," Matthew said, his tone deceptively mild, "I think it's time for you to leave. Your daughter is safe and well cared for. If she chooses to contact you, that will be her decision." For a tense moment, Josephine thought her father might lunge at Matthew. Instead, he spat on the ground. "You made your choice," he said to Josephine. "Don't come crawling back when he's done with you." He turned and stomped back to his wagon, climbing up and whipping the horses into motion without a backward glance. Josephine's knees weakened as the wagon disappeared down the drive. Matthew's hand at her elbow steadied her. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Come inside," he said, guiding her gently. "Mrs. Rivera made lemonade earlier." They sat at the kitchen table, Josephine clutching a glass of lemonade between trembling hands. Matthew watched her with patient concern. "He'll be back," she finally said. "Or he'll spread rumors about us in town." Matthew shrugged. "Let him. I've got nothing to hide, and neither do you." Josephine met his gaze. "But your reputation?" "My reputation can withstand a few wagging tongues," he interrupted. "I'm more concerned about yours." She looked down at her lemonade. "It may already be ruined. 2 weeks living at a bachelor's ranch." Matthew was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was hesitant, unlike his usual confident tone. "There's a solution," he said slowly. "If you'd consider it." Josephine looked up, puzzled. "What solution?" "Marriage." The word hung in the air between them. "I know it's sudden, and I'm not expecting. That is, it would be in name only, if you prefer. But it would silence the gossips and give you a place to belong. Legally." Josephine stared at him, stunned. "You'd marry me? Just to protect my reputation?" Matthew's expression grew serious. "Not just for that. I've grown fond of you, Josephine. More than fond. I know it hasn't been long, but..." He took a deep breath. "I believe we could build a good life together, if you were willing to try." Her heart pounded in her chest. She had been fighting her growing feelings for Matthew, telling herself it was just gratitude, just the natural response to his kindness. But in this moment, she couldn't deny the truth. "I don't want a marriage in name only," she whispered. Hope flared in Matthew's eyes. "What do you want?" "A real marriage. With you." The words came out before she could second-guess them. "I've grown fond of you too, Matthew." His smile transformed his face, making him look younger, less careworn. "Is that a yes?" Josephine nodded, a smile breaking through her own worries. "Yes." 3 days later, they stood before the circuit preacher in the town of Cimarron. Mrs. Rivera had helped Josephine alter one of her own Sunday dresses, a simple blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. Matthew wore a clean black suit that made his shoulders look even broader than usual. The ceremony was brief, but meaningful. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Matthew's kiss was gentle, respectful, but with a promise of deeper passion that made Josephine's cheeks burn. A small celebration followed at the ranch, with the hands raising glasses of whiskey and Mrs. Rivera serving a wedding cake she'd baked for the occasion. As evening fell, the guests dispersed, leaving the newlyweds alone. Matthew took Josephine's hand. "I've had a room prepared for you upstairs," he said quietly. "If you'd prefer your own space for now." She squeezed his fingers. "I married you for real, Matthew. All of it." Relief and desire mingled in his expression as he led her to the master bedroom. Their first night together was tender, patient, as they discovered each other with wonder and growing passion. Afterward, lying in Matthew's arms, Josephine felt a sense of belonging she'd never known before. "I never expected this," she murmured against his chest. "When Pa threw me out, I thought my life was over." Matthew stroked her hair. "Sometimes endings are just beginnings in disguise. Summer faded into fall, and fall gave way to winter." Josephine thrived as the mistress of the Double W, learning ranch management from Matthew and housekeeping from Mrs. Rivera. Her days were full of purpose, her nights warm with love. For the first time in her life, she felt truly free. Word came, through the town gossips, that her father's farm was struggling. Her mother had fallen ill again, and her sisters were overworked trying to manage both the household and the field work. Josephine agonized over the news, but couldn't bring herself to reach out. "They know where to find you," Matthew reminded her gently. "The choice has to be theirs." The first snow of winter was falling when a wagon appeared on the road to the ranch. Josephine was in the kitchen, kneading bread dough, when Mrs. Rivera called her to the window. "You have visitors," the housekeeper said, her expression carefully neutral. Josephine wiped her hands on her apron and peered out. Her breath caught at the sight of her mother and youngest sister, Elizabeth, huddled in a wagon driven by the middle sister, Catherine. There was no sign of her father. Matthew came in from the barn, alerted by one of the hands. He stood beside Josephine, his hand warm on her back. "Do you want to see them?" he asked quietly. "Yes," she whispered. "But I'm afraid. I'll be right with you." They went out onto the porch together. The three women climbed down from the wagon, looking uncertain. Josephine's mother seemed to have aged years in the months since Josephine had seen her. She was thin, her face deeply lined, but her eyes brightened at the sight of her eldest daughter. "Josephine," she called, her voice wavering. "Can you ever forgive me for not standing up to your father?" Josephine flew down the steps and into her mother's arms. They clung to each other, both weeping, while her sisters hovered nearby. "Where is Pa?" Josephine asked when she could speak again. Her mother's face fell. "He's gone. Left 2 months ago after the bank took the farm. Said he was heading to California to find work." "The farm is gone," Josephine gasped. Catherine nodded grimly. "Everything but the house itself. We've been taking in laundry to survive, but—" She trailed off, looking embarrassed. "But we're starving," Elizabeth finished bluntly. At 16, she had their father's forthright manner without his cruelty. "And Ma's not well." Matthew stepped forward. "You'll stay here," he said simply. "All of you." Josephine's mother looked at him with uncertainty. "We couldn't impose your family," Matthew interrupted. "And the Double W has plenty of room." That night, with her family settled in guest rooms and her mother resting comfortably after a hot meal and a visit from the doctor Matthew had sent for, Josephine curled against her husband's side in their bed. "Thank you," she whispered, "for taking them in." Matthew kissed her forehead. "Did you think I wouldn't?" "I wasn't sure. After everything Pa said to you." "Your father's actions aren't their fault," Matthew said. "Besides, I've seen how you miss them. Having them here will make you happy." Josephine raised herself on an elbow to look at him in the dim light. "You make me happy," she said earnestly. "Every day." Matthew's smile was tender as he traced her cheek with gentle fingers. "And you've given me more joy than I ever thought possible." His hand drifted down to rest on her stomach, which had just begun to show the slightest curve. "Both of you." They had discovered the pregnancy only weeks earlier. The baby would arrive in late spring, according to the doctor's estimation. Josephine covered Matthew's hand with her own, savoring the shared secret of new life. "I was thinking," Matthew said thoughtfully, "that the old foreman's cabin could be fixed up nicely for your mother and Elizabeth. And there's that teaching position opening in town come spring. Catherine might be interested, if she's got your love of books." Josephine's heart swelled with love for this man who was already making plans to give her family not just shelter, but purpose. "You've thought of everything." "I try to," he said with a soft chuckle. "A man's got to take care of what's his." His expression grew serious. "That day I found you by the trail, something told me to take that route instead of my usual one. I think maybe we were meant to find each other." "I believe that too," Josephine whispered, leaning down to kiss him. "Out of the darkest day of my life came the greatest blessing." Spring arrived with new growth across the ranch and within the Walsh family. Josephine's mother had regained her health under Mrs. Rivera's careful feeding and the doctor's regular visits. Elizabeth had blossomed, helping with the ranch horses and showing a natural talent that had the hands grudgingly impressed. Catherine had indeed taken the teaching position in town, boarding with the preacher's family during the week and returning to the ranch on weekends. On a perfect May morning, with wildflowers dotting the pastures and birdsong filling the air, Josephine gave birth to a daughter they named Margaret, after Matthew's mother. She had her father's blue eyes and a tuft of dark hair that promised to be as unruly as her mother's. Matthew held his daughter with awe, his weathered hands impossibly gentle against her tiny form. "She's perfect," he whispered, looking up at Josephine with tears in his eyes. Just like her mother. Sitting in the rocking chair by their bedroom window a week later, nursing Margaret, while watching Matthew work with a young colt in the corral below, Josephine reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From cast-out daughter to beloved wife and mother, from homeless wanderer to mistress of a thriving ranch. Matthew looked up, as if sensing her gaze, and touched his hat brim in a gesture that still made her heart flutter. She smiled and lifted Margaret's tiny hand in a wave. That evening, with Margaret sleeping peacefully in her cradle and the ranch settling down for the night, Matthew and Josephine sat on the porch swing, his arm around her shoulders as they watched the stars appear. "I got a letter today," Matthew said, "from my brother James. He's finished his law studies and wants to come west to set up practice." "That's wonderful," Josephine replied. "Will he stay here at the ranch?" Matthew nodded. "For a while, at least. He talks about building a place in town eventually." He paused, his fingers playing with a strand of Josephine's hair. There was something else in his letter. Apparently, he ran into a man in Denver who was asking about the Double W. A man named Blackwood. Josephine stiffened. "My father. Sounds like it. James says he was down on his luck, working odd jobs. Asked if his daughter Josephine was still at the ranch." Her heart beat faster. "What did James tell him?" "The truth. That you're my wife now, mother of my child, and mistress of the Double W." Matthew turned to look at her. James invited him to come meet his granddaughter, if he was so inclined. Josephine was quiet for a long moment, processing her feelings. "Do you think he will?" "I don't know. But if he does, we'll face it together." Matthew squeezed her shoulder. "Your father made a terrible mistake when he cast you out. But people can change. Sometimes they just need a second chance to get things right." Josephine thought of the second chance she'd been given that day on the trail, when a kind cowboy had offered his help to a desperate young woman. How that chance had blossomed into love, family, and a true home. "If he comes," she said finally, "we'll hear what he has to say. Everyone deserves the opportunity to make amends." Matthew kissed her temple. "That's my Josie, always finding the grace in difficult situations." She leaned into his embrace, content in the knowledge that whatever came, whether reconciliation with her father or continued estrangement, she would face it with Matthew beside her. From the day he had offered his name and a place to belong, she had never been alone again. As the stars multiplied across the vast New Mexico sky, Josephine closed her eyes and offered a silent prayer of gratitude. For the end that had become a beginning. For the loss that had led to finding. For the cowboy who had seen a frightened girl by the trail and recognized the woman she could become, if only someone believed in her. And most of all, for the love that had transformed them both, creating a family and a legacy that would endure long after they were gone.